Welcome to Building a Better Recurring Villain with Captain Mike, which is me. I'm Captain Mike. Thank you. Thank you. This is the sort of sequel to Building a Better Villain from yesterday. A quick round of applause, everyone who was here yesterday for Building a Better Villain. Yep, good. See some hands. You don't have to have been to that panel to get quite a lot out of this, in my opinion. But then again, I will recommend my panels to anyone just because I like having people in my panels. It makes me feel good. But this is focusing more on the long-term use of villains, what makes them not just able to recur, but also what makes them very functional and helpful to a setting, and all that kind of jazz. So, without further ado, I know some people had come in after I made this announcement. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to raise a hand or call them on out, and I'll do my best to address them. If you need to get in touch with me later for whatever reason, certainly you can catch me when I'm just wandering around MAGFest, or you can reach me at captainmike@captainmike.net. Yes? Is there a summary of your previous panel somewhere? Ooh, good question. Is there a summary of my previous panel somewhere? Yes and no. My understanding is that all of the panels at MAGFest are being recorded and will be available after the convention at some unspecified time. And so I can be searched that way, and you can see the actual presentation, which includes my delightful commentary as well as my general witticisms. If you either like the panels that you see and couldn't be bothered to take notes along the way, or you forgot a few pieces, or you just want a reminder, or there's a panel that I did and you couldn't get a chance to attend them and you just want a copy of the panels, you can email me. I don't have an online repository for my slides, but I will email you a PDF of the slides as soon as I get around to it, which is usually within about a week of returning from any given convention. Cool? All right. Was that a question, or were you just like, hey person? Well, latecomers are certainly welcome. Come on in, grab a seat. Okay. I'm going to take a quick moment to get untangled here because this is going to be trouble waiting to happen. Hey, do-si-do. You didn't think you were going to get a show. Just to recap, I am Captain Mike, Captain Mike Clegg. I started gaming with Dungeons & Dragons, so I always give myself the 6 cardinal stats from strength down to charisma. I am a presenter. I am also a teacher, and I'm sure if you've been to any of my other panels, you've seen this slide before. I'm a presenter. I'm a teacher. I have a master's degree in writing, a bachelor's degree in English. I've been playing for years, and I'm an actual teacher, too, so in case that doesn't become abundantly clear. All right, so what we're going to be discussing in this particular panel is the construction and maintenance of recurring villains. Things that make them good villains, things that make them good recurring villains. Not every villain works well over and over again. How they affect the story mechanics, or how the story mechanics will influence the recurrence of villains, and how to deal with them in the ongoing campaign. But first, if you've been to any of my panels at any point over the past years that I've been presenting, you've seen this panel before too. The most important thing I can always give as a piece of advice to anyone who is a game master or a player or even just a communicator is to know your audience. With villainy, this is especially true because there are different levels of villainy, there are different types of villainy, and not every player is comfortable with particular levels of villainy, particular levels of violence, or just generally overriding the rights of others. And indeed, not every game master is comfortable going into those kinds of dark places or even hyperviolence that some settings or particular villains may call for. There is a big difference between, say, Team Rocket and Akira. Akira is a pretty dated reference, Mike. Oh, thanks. I'm old. There will be more old jokes, too. I've been really feeling it this year. I feel like we've all been feeling it this year. But anyway, knowing your audience is super helpful and super important. One thing that I will say specifically about recurring villains is that it's helpful to know whether or not your players actually like dealing with that recurring villain. There are villains that we love to hate and hate to love, but there are also villains that we just straight up hate. And so it's important to kind of keep a keen eye towards determining whether or not your players, hate the bad guy because they just keep getting away, or we just got to get them, and if they're starting to get like, I just don't like when this guy shows up, it drags me down, man. So know your audience. blah, blah, blah. Characteristics of recurring villains. By the way, I will use the term villain consistently throughout this because it is a convenient term, but by villain, I really mean antagonist. That is, someone who is opposed to the protagonist, which in most role-playing games, actually all role-playing games by definition, would be the player characters. The protagonists are whoever the main characters are. So even if your main characters are the Legion of Evil or Dr. Doom and friends, even though they are traditionally villains, they are the protagonists. So confusingly, that would make the good guys the villains. Don't go down that rabbit hole, Mike. I think we all get the idea. But let's talk for a moment about villains that are recurring villains that are not strictly speaking evil monsters or villains, but rather rivals. There's kind of a difference between a villain and a rival. A rival isn't someone who's out to kill someone. It's just that there is a hefty competition. There's some sort of thing where both the protagonists and the rival, they both want the same thing, but they can't both have it, or they just have something about each other where they annoy each other, so anything that one wants, the other will try to block. A nice example of the rivalry is Eddie Brock and Peter Parker. If you remember back before Venom, Eddie Brock was just another photographer, and so there was a rivalry between Eddie Brock photographer and Peter Parker photographer. This later became the rivalry between Eddie Brock Venom and Peter Parker, whatever that guy is, and became more of a classic hero-villain struggle, but it started off as a simple rivalry. Likewise, Spider-Man and J. Jonah Jameson are good examples. They are rivals. J. Jonah Jameson isn't really out to kill Spider-Man. He just wants him defamed, and if he gets killed along the way, well, whatever sells the papes, right? Papes? What is this, the 20s? Thank you very much. I have had a wonderful time. Thank you and good night. Oh my God, it is. That's it. Papes are back in. Put it on a spinning headline. Thank you, whoever shouted that out, for reminding me what year it is. So, rivalries, they're always based around some level of competition. They're either an explicit competition, maybe it's two people with the same love interest, or some sort of unspecific, I just don't want you to do better than I do in any particular way. Rivalries are typically non-lethal. Typically. The J. Jonah Jameson thing is probably a good example of this, where, like I said, J. Jonah Jameson isn't looking to get Spider-Man killed, but that certainly doesn't stop him from, funding the Scorpion Project, if you remember that, which, admittedly, was not JJ's original plan. But I'm not here to apologize for J. Jonah Jameson, as indeed no one is. When it comes to a rivalry, there is some sort of a prize or goal often involved. It might be a changing goal as things go. It might be, say, the Cross of Coronado, if you're an Indiana Jones fan. It belongs in a museum, so do you. There's that level of rivalry. Although that rivalry, I seem to recall being fairly lethal in the end. And it could be a professional rivalry where it's just, hey, I'm in this business, you're also in this business. Welcome to the world of business. Or it could be personal, which could be, a love triangle, or it could just be, that guy thinks he's better than me, or, he always bullied me at school, and this guy always bullied me. I think it's because he thinks I get better grades than him, or something like that. So these are the kinds of elements that go in. Rivals are nice as recurring villains because they're competitive and because they're non-lethal. They're good chances to have combat and character development. Not combat specifically, but conflict and character development that does not involve killing each other, which a lot of role-playing games seem to lack. And I'd like to see more of that. Even things like if you're playing D&D, you can have an alternate group of adventurers who are oftentimes after the same prize or fighting, trying to fight the same monsters. And so they keep getting in each other's way, but they're both good character parties, but they just have this competition. It's like, oh, how did you get here first? How did you get here first? Well, we're gonna slay that dragon and get the treasure. And they're like, well, not if we slay it first, so forth. So there's a lot of good elements for character development because conversation is more likely to happen than you get with the traditional band of goblins, arrows to the face sort of business. Those tend to be a bit more pointed in conversation. They're not getting any better, I gotta tell you. So, recurring means showing up again and again, which means that the villain has to have a way to show up later, and that's sometimes hard to do if you're dead. If you're a necromancer, maybe, death isn't the handicap it used to be in the olden days, but it's helpful to have a reason not to die. Part of it might be style. Maybe it's just a villain that is just too cool to die. They manage to get away, they just always seem to have just a way to smooth talk their way out of things, or they just kind of slip out. Or maybe the GM just likes playing the character too much, the players like the character being around too much, and they kind of let the bad guy get away because, hey, he was pretty cool. Too slick. Sometimes you're trying to, you've got the villain cornered. There's no way out, and then suddenly a scroll of teleportation, a ring of blink, a hitherto unknown jetpack. All of these kinds of things show up, and they're just too fast. They're just one step ahead of the heroes every time. This is a great way to make your heroes infuriated, especially by the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time. And so in that regard, if it's something where they're just too slick, I heartily recommend a variety of slickness. It's okay, this time we've planned for the jetpack. This time we've planned for the teleport belt. You're on the roof. You're in the sewers. We're going to come in pincer style. And then, you break into the building, and then the villain's a hologram. And it's what? What? You have reached the life model decoy of Dr. Destroyer. Hero ethics is a great way for villains not to die, because they don't die because the heroes won't kill them. This is basically how the Joker has gotten away every time. Well, okay, not in some of the movies. But hero ethics are a good reason to have a villain be able to escape. Or not even escape, but just simply survive to another day, because especially if you're dealing with superheroes, many superheroes have that code versus killing for which they get those delicious 15 character points. But it also means that they can't... thank you, the people who smiled remembering Champions. Because it means that, a code versus killing isn't just, I'm not going to knife you in the throat because I'm such a great person, but it's also, I can't let you die. So even if Dr. Destroyo has just sent a busload of nuns into a busload of puppy dogs and has brought up a volcano in the middle of Main Street and is now defeated and is now about to fall over that volcano, the heroes aren't really allowed to just say, well, you made your volcano lava bed, you lie in it. Not really a call to action I was expecting. They have to help out. But this also means that, a lot of those villains, they go to jail. And, ask anybody at the Gotham City PD how much that's worth. So it might not be that the heroes don't want to kill the person. It might be that the heroes shouldn't kill that person. Maybe that person has friends in very high places. Just so well protected that... if we kill him, then this other group is going to come after us. Now, it could be a situation where killing the villain means that the literal police will be after you, because I just talked about murder. That is, killing a villain is still murder, right? Right, Punisher? No. It's justice. But they might be protected, and it might be that they are protected under the law of the land. It might be that they are protected by some sort of mafia or gang lord group. It might be because they are part of a treaty with the local orc tribes or something like that. And so it might just be too dangerous to actually kill the villain, so it's just a case of stopping the villain and then kind of hoping that they don't do it again. Hero work is difficult. And of course, the best reason not to die is having a complete inability to do so. Dracula from Castlevania is a great example of this. Kill him all you want, he'll be back. That's just the nature of who he is. He can't even stop it, and depending on which game you're playing, he may not even have asked for it. I think it was Castlevania Symphony of the Night, where he says something like, "It is not by my hand that I am once again given human form." That's not me being a bad voice actor. Go back and listen to those. And if you haven't, YouTube that conversation between Belmont and Dracula, because it is hilarious. It is like listening to a high school troupe that didn't make it in the official high school troop. But immortality is a good reason not to die, and that's often an infuriating but something that just can't be stopped aspect of villains, especially if you're dealing with fantasy settings, or like the aforementioned necromancers, who might have enough magical power that even killing them just sends them back. Or if you're playing some Dungeons and Dragons and you're getting creatures from the lower planes involved, many of them are not killed when you kill them. They are sent back for 1 to 666 years, depending on which thing it is, and then they get to come back. Or if you're playing Mummy the Resurrection from White Wolf, like you can't keep them down. And so sooner or later they're gonna come back. And there's always the issue where sometimes it's just more trouble to kill the villain than it is not to. Maybe it's because killing them creates a power vacuum that will just bring in more and more terrible options. It might be that, again, killing them brings in the ire of other places. They might be load-bearing villains where, if you kill them, the whole thing comes down. What was it? Didn't Magneto have like an entire asteroid that was held together by his force of will or something like that? So it's like, oh, we'll just kill Magneto, and then I guess Asteroid M will just crash into the Earth. Oh, hey, you can't break an omelet without destroying a continent, right? I'm pretty sure that's what my cooking teacher said. So, it's one thing to defeat a villain and then not kill them, but that villain still needs to come back for something. And that's often the rub. Because many heroes who are not going to kill someone, they're obviously not going to kill someone. Villains that get away, they get away. But if you went to work and you tried to do a project, and then a bunch of people came in and then beat you up and then stole your paperwork, how fast are you coming back to work the next day? I might not ever go back. Maybe just to grab my tax paperwork. So there has to be a reason to return. And that could be that the villain just has an agenda. Maybe there is some larger plan in motion, and death wasn't part of that plan, or being defeated wasn't enough. This is very common among supervillains, where it's just they have an overall plan, and they're not going to stop just because someone blew up their laser beam shaped like a top hat, or broke their robot made out of marshmallows, or whatever their MO is. And so they're like, we have to get this done. This defeat is just a temporary setback. And so they're going to keep trying. They're probably ideally, they're going to learn from their mistakes. So they're going to come back with an even fancier hat-based laser, or they're going to come back with a s'mores-based robot instead of just a marshmallow one. These are ridiculous examples, Mike. Thank you. It's been a long weekend. So they're going to get more surreal from here on out. And so there's that strong reason to return. This requires villains who have a plan that does not specifically involve the adventurers. Just, I'm going to do this. People showed up to stop me. All right, they stopped me this time. Next time. What was it? Dr. Claw. Yeah. Next time, Gadget. If a villain is consistently useful, they'll keep showing up. And here we're going to step back from like the supervillains and the Lich Lords and the major powerhouses. Anybody remember the Rhino from Spider-Man? Anybody remember Captain Boomerang? Or let's see, who was a low-tier DC Batman villain? I don't know, Clayface even. These are characters that come back not necessarily because they had a particular agenda or even because they particularly wanted to. It's just they have a job, and their job is helping out other villains or just doing their job. Like, hey, got to go to work. Like I said, if you went to work and somebody beat you up, how long before you went back to work? I didn't say, would you go back again? I said, how long before you went back to work? For some people, for some villains, this is a job. One of my favorite scenes from the 90s from the 90s Spider-Man is when the Rhino gets a phone call from Wilson Fisk, and the Rhino is just in a recliner watching baseball, but he's still the Rhino. So he's just the Rhino watching baseball. He's like, yeah. What? Sure, I'll join your stupid club. And then, he goes and becomes part of the Sinister Six. I'm a big Spider-Man fan. case that's not apparent. But yeah, I love that scene because it's a great idea. That's why these villains are recurring. Is like, what is he gonna do? Go get a job down at Home Depot? He's the Rhino. He looks like a rhino. Actually, he looks like a guy who was eaten by a rhino costume. He has a rap sheet. Like, they're not going to hire him down at Home Depot. He's not going to turn his life around. He's going to take whatever job, and then he's going to show up, and then he's going to try to punch Spider-Man, and then he's not going to do it. And then maybe next week he'll show up again. But he is consistently useful, as are all of these mid and low tier villains. There's just so many of them. Tombstone recently made an appearance in a movie. And I love him as a recurring villain because he's just like, he's the perfect, just better than all of the other goons kind of goon. You know, he's just a little tougher, a little stronger, but then not enough to be like the main bad guy. And of course, the classic reason to return for villains is this time it's personal. Like, I was just going to try to take over the tri-state area, but now I'm here to capture Perry the Platypus. The tri-state area. That was terrible, Mike. Thank you. Yeah, now it's personal. This is, of course, the classic reason to have a recurring villain. Because the villain tries to do something, the hero shows up, smackety smack, and then the villain decides, okay, I don't need to get revenge on society. I don't need to get revenge. I don't need to take over the tri-state area. I don't need to, destroy Gryffindor or whatever. Now, it's after that person because they stopped me once. So I'm going to take them out because that was a huge insult. Or I'm going to take them out because obviously they're going to try to stop me again. And then I can get back to my regularly scheduled villainy. And so the Now It's Personal is very strong. Now It's Personal is an excellent way to start building villains from just your casual people who do stuff, antagonistic stuff, to actual nemeses and arch villains and arch enemies, which I'll get into in a little bit. And of course, the occasionally underappreciated coincidence. Sometimes the villain's as surprised to see the hero as the hero is to see the villain. Like, what are you doing here? It's like, this was your plan? Okay, I guess we're doing this again. And then, of course, after a while, you can only take so much coincidence before things start getting a bit more connected, but sometimes it's just coincidence. The Ultimate Series Shocker would try to knock over banks and so forth, and Spider-Man just kept showing up. And I think at one point he went to a bank in another borough to try to hope that Spider-Man wouldn't find him and stop him, and Spider-Man just happened to be in the neighborhood and was like, hey. Shocker's like, what? Why are you here? It's like, I was just passing through, thwip, thwip. So, coincidence. All right. So, those are some of the characteristics of these recurring villains, the things that make them keep showing up. But let's talk about how they actually change or influence the story mechanics and vice versa. So there are background villains, there are occasional villains, and there are persistent villains. Persistent, going in reverse order, persistent recurring villains, these are the ones who show up every week. These are the ones that, like, every session either involves them directly or at least partially. This would be like Cobra Commander and Destro. Every episode, it's Cobra Commander and Destro. Sometimes it's just Destro. Sometimes it's just Cobra Commander. Sometimes it's one of their flunkies working directly for them, and they still get a lot of airtime. But those are the persistent ones. These are good villains because they become very familiar, and there's a lot of opportunity for character building. And it also means that the players immediately know what they're dealing with. So they're like, oh, it's Dr. Claw. It's Cobra Commander. It's Shredder. From the Turtles, specifically. They're still around, right? The Turtles? Sure. So they're always there. The downside to a persistent villain is that they're always there. They're very familiar, and unless you're introducing new elements, they can become a little bit stale, or they can become a little overly frustrating, because how many sessions can you go in a row defeating someone before it's like, well, why can't we just catch them? Or why do they keep coming back? And these are both reasonable questions to ask. I've often wondered, like, Cobra Commander is supposed to have a lot of money and troops, and he has the troops. Destro has the money, as I recall. But I'm like, what kind of brochure does Cobra Commander hand out? Like, how many times has he been defeated? A couple of times thrown in jail? He's been publicly disgraced basically constantly? Like, is he giving out, like, college credit for this? Dental? Oh, Yeah, that would do it. Free dental. How many people shooting at me? Oh, but they never miss. Or no, they never hit. They never hit. Ooh. And internship. So persistent villains, you have to consider, like, why would they keep coming back? Why would they keep trying? How is it that they're going to get away constantly? Occasional recurring villains, I think, are some of the most effective, where just every so often you'll have like intervening episodes, maybe you might call them filler episodes, or even just have a few different recurring villains, and they kind of seem to take turns being the big bad. And those can be very handy because then it's the question, well, like, which villain are we dealing with? Sometimes it's obvious. A green question mark and a riddle appeared on my doorstep. I'm thinking the trickster. No, that was the Riddler, for just in case you thought I mixed them up. Calendar Man. But then you end up with a thing where sometimes you can like fake the players out because, you know, Calendar Man, well, what if it was like the anniversary of the Riddler's first loss? You know, you could like switch it up on them. And that's one of the nice things about having a few different occasional recurring villains is that you develop that sort of rogues gallery. You can develop, this kind of villain does this sort of thing. This villain does this sort of thing. And we'll actually get into that a little bit towards the end of this list, in fact. But you can develop those sorts of things. So then you get the situation where the players recognize the kind of stuff that's going to happen. You're going to be like, oh, we're dealing with Wilson Fisk, so this is going to be like definitely an organized crime sort of a deal, or we're dealing with Black Mask, and that's going to be definitely like some sort of mafiosi thing. But then you can also switch it up, and it's like maybe for the after that adventure, the next one is going to be some sort of clown-based thing, and it's like, oh, we're having a Joker session, or a Joker episode, or a Joker series of adventures. And then background recurring villains, these are the ones that sort of show up very infrequently, but have a tendency to influence the things that are going on. I guess to continue with the DC trend, if you remember Arkham Asylum, I would put Dr. I was about to say Dr. Harble, and that is not the right character. Dr. Strange, thank you. Dr. Strange is more like that background figure where he's not really directly involved in what's going on with the players, but he has organized all the things, he's pushed other villains forward. And if you have background villains like that, they may either be the kind of figures where they're talked about from the very beginning, but they don't show up until the very last session, like Sauron, who would make a great background villain. Did make a great background villain, would make a great background, if I ever get around to writing those Lord of the Whatever books. And so talked about very often, clearly influences in subtle ways what's going on, but it doesn't really appear personally until the end. Or someone who just does that most of the time, but only appears very briefly, and perhaps only when the players find a way to specifically break into that sanctum to specifically get to that person. All right. On the other hand, it isn't when you're developing your recurring characters or find yourself just with a recurring character, because sometimes villains just get away and you didn't think they would. Sometimes it happens that way. The setting has to support that recurrence. So you remember when I mentioned the Rhino just sitting in his apartment watching TV? Fortunately, the 90s Spider-Man had kind of a setting where, let's be, regular people were regular people, but if you saw someone running down the street in spandex, it wasn't that weird. I mean, it was New York, superhero times. You're just kind of like, oh, that guy was dressed like a, snowflake or something. Dr. Octopus. And so he could probably get away with having an apartment, but not every setting would. If you wanted like a really gritty real life world, could you imagine the Rhino trying to get an apartment? Like, yeah, I'm going to need a credit check and a reality check, pal. You're 8 feet tall and you look like a rhino ate most of you. But the setting has to support that recurrence. Likewise, if you have a setting where you have like, maybe you're not dealing with supervillains, you're dealing with regular criminals, it's actually really hard to break out of jail. I'm sure a lot of people have tried. I feel like it's happening right now, and it's probably failing. So the setting has to support it. Arkham Asylum canonically is made of Swiss cheese, like between the... Not literally Swiss cheese, just parts of it. No, it is not canonically made out of Swiss cheese. I don't want to go on record as having said that, but like, there are a lot of explanations for why villains seem to escape. One, many of them have superpowers that aren't like dampened in any way. The building itself is 200 years old. The reason the Joker got out so frequently is often attributed to connections on the outside, or Harley Quinn specifically, especially when Harley was his actual psychologist. How easy is it for her to get him out? So you have to have a setting that supports that recurrence. Fantasy settings, this tends to be a little easier because magic is a great way to be like, and then they teleport it out. But if you're dealing with a large interconnected thing, there has to be some way that the villain can get away to plan their next attack or even just catch their breath. And even in a fantasy setting, if you have scrying or like magic sight, which I guess would necessitate magic eyeballs. If you have magic eyeballs that can see all over the place, well then why is it that why couldn't we catch Count von Kill-em-all? One, I'd think he'd go back to Kill 'em All, which is apparently the name of his county, because he's a count, you see. Count von Kill 'em All. Like, why can't we just magically detect him and then go bust him in the face? And it might be something as simple as saying, well, in Kill 'em All County, he's politically protected. He's the count. He's allowed to do that stuff. It's only a crime when he comes to count, don't kill 'em all. Then it's a crime. The Victor Von Doom defense. And when you're considering, and you also have catalyst villains. Remember I mentioned J. Jonah Jameson and the Scorpion Project? J. Jonah Jameson is a rival, but he ended up becoming a catalyst for a significant number of villains. He became the direct catalyst for the Scorpion Project, which led us to the Scorpion, cleverly named, which became an ongoing villain himself. In a roundabout way, was responsible for Venom by belittling Eddie Brock when he was found out to be a fraud and blah, blah, blah. And so as you have recurring villains, they can create more villains, which is super handy, especially if you're in a setting where you need more of a push to get villains, or you need something that just kind of sparks them off. Because if you have a villain that got away once, they may have learned that they need to either set the adventurers on a new track, like let me give them something to really fight against while I secretly do my other stuff, or they're just looking to build up their own sort of anti-adventuring party. And then this can lead to a format change. This is something that really gets into the difference in the mechanics, and it depends on how your game is designed. So suppose you have, a classic D&D scenario, and when you're a D&D character, what's your job? You're an adventurer, right? And adventurers don't sit at home. They go out and they find things to stab, and then treasure to loot, and then bad guys to do whatever and stab and or loot. And that's kind of going out on the offense. But when you've got a recurring villain that is now looking to get the adventurers, they're not playing offense anymore. They have to play defense. And this may coincide nicely with like rising levels and people building strongholds, or maybe deciding that they have enough treasure to kind of build up their own area. But as a GM, you can take that and make it go from being the going out on different adventures to coming in, and it's almost like a tower defense sort of a game, where now the question is not how can you go out and right wrongs, but what do you do when the bad guys come for you? How can you build up your defenses? What do you do when the dragon comes to your home and starts adventuring in your place? Remember, once adventurers have enough money, technically they're monsters for other adventurers. I didn't think about it like that, did you? Hey, heroes are worth experience points too. And the higher the treasure type, the higher the experience. And so you can have these kinds of significant format changes. It might even be a situation where the villains aren't coming specifically for the heroes, but maybe they can start consistently attacking places that they know the heroes will be. Maybe they notice, hey, these heroes, they've stopped me like 3 times. I've got to go on the offense and I've got to take them out. So I don't know where exactly they live, but they seem to be well connected to this king. So I'm going to go burn his castle to the ground. And now the heroes have to deal with protecting other people. So you can get this really interesting change in the actual story dynamics itself, the game mechanics, which can really liven things up, especially if your heroes are getting a little tired of always going out and adventuring. Sometimes it's nice to be able to stay home and then adventure, or have the adventurer come to you. There's more cleanup, though. And the Nemesis versus the Rogues Gallery. A Nemesis is a great device. A Nemesis is someone who is the hero's opposite, but sort of like a dark mirror of it. And so a nemesis, it helps to really craft a nemesis. Similar powers, similar mentalities, or directly opposing powers or directly opposing mentalities. So you might have, say, the Batman Joker mentalities, where Batman is, at all costs we must have law and order, and the Joker's premise of at all costs we must have chaos and disorder. Depending on your Batman and depending on your Joker, you may have different perspectives. They've changed a few times over the years. But they're always some sort of mirror of each other. A Rogues Gallery is more like an ongoing set of occasional recurring characters, which is also very useful because this can really help show the tone and the style of the game that you're trying to run. Consider, what the heck? I got to go with Spider-Man again. Consider Spider-Man's cast of characters for his Rogues Gallery. It's characters like the Lizard and the Rhino and Doc Ock and Mysterio, and almost all of them are animal characters, but they're all brightly colored. They're all over the top. They're all fun characters. Even if it's a gritty storyline, there's still that sort of like bright color to them. These are people who decided that in order to show the world how strong they were, they put on the tightest spandex they could find in the most garish of colors and called themselves things like Mysterio, who's one of my favorite villains, by the way. And so it shows a lot about the setting. Spider-Man himself, incredibly spangled, very bright and fun. Contrast that to the Punisher, whose Rogues Gallery doesn't even last that long. But often includes people who are just as grim and vicious and murderous as he is, or even Batman's cast of characters, many of whom have that kind of four-color quality, but are all tinged with like that darker, deeper psychological issues or inherent despair or something like that. There's always something very disturbing about them, which goes in tune with Batman, even when he's four-color, maybe not quite the Adam West level, but is often portrayed as having a much darker storyline than most other superheroes. Superman, who does he fight? The most ludicrous of enemies. He fights, Bizarro, who doesn't even have a consistent speech pattern. He fights Lex Luthor, who is occasionally a savvy businessman and occasionally a businessman in spandex, which is as ridiculous as it sounds. But he fights these kind of larger-than-life figures, these larger-than-life powerhouses. In fact, Powerhouse wasn't that one of his, I want to say? And so you can get these strong connections between both the characters and just by seeing their villains and how they interact with those villains. So let's talk a little bit more about Nemesis versus Rogues Gallery. So a Nemesis is very specific to a character. You can have a group of Nemeses. I know, it's Nemesis. A group of Nemeses and a group of characters, and they kind of match up. But typically, a Nemesis is specific to a character and is some sort of twisted reflection. Either it's we both ended up with the same powers, or at least ended up with them the same way, but yours turned you into a hero and mine turned me into a villain. You saw this as, the hero sees it as something that has to be shared or an advantage, and the villain sees it as either a right to get away with whatever they want, or it ruins their life, and so they're going to take it out on other people. I'll go again to Spider-Man and Doc Ock. Both of them got their powers originally in the same laboratory accident. Spider-Man got bitten by the radioactive spider, but that incident also fused Doc Ock's arms to him, which made him lose his mind, and he took it out on the rest of the world. He, wanted to right the wrongs as he saw them, and then that slowly just turned into him thinking he's just better than everyone else, so he's going to do science his way. Spider-Man, same accident, ends up helping more people. It's this kind of reflection, same deal, different vibe. There's some element of personal connection. Even if the two nemeses don't recognize each other as having some sort of previous history, they either develop one very quickly because they are the opposing forces, or they are actually from similar origins. If not, people who actually knew each other, like, you were my brother once. Or like, well, now we are enemies. That's not from a specific movie, but it could have been from 80 or 90 movies. And the purpose of a nemesis is to get into the characters. to get into what motivates the characters, because what motivates the hero and what motivates the villain will be similar, except for that one thing, except for that one twist or that one alteration. And so that leads to better character development. Well, if if these two characters had the same problem happen to them, what made one become a hero? Why does he stay a hero? Why didn't the hero become a villain? Why didn't the hero decide to abuse their power? You can really get into that. And so let's consider instead the Rogues Gallery, which is on the other side. Now, the Rogues Gallery isn't character-specific, but it is setting-specific. It reflects the setting. If your Rogues Gallery is full of brightly colored characters that are fairly fun and lighthearted, then you're getting that sense of the setting itself. If your Rogues Gallery has dark and gritty opponents in it, then that too reflects the setting. Suppose if you're playing a fantasy game and you're like, hey, Mike, you've been talking about superheroes for like 20 minutes. And I'm like, that is a standard day. Only 20 minutes, you say. Suppose you're playing a game of D&D. The Rogues Gallery there might be, maybe if it's a world where magic is very feared, then the Rogues Gallery is going to have a lot of very fearsome magic users, probably very powerful individually, and perhaps even more powerful collectively. Perhaps if you're playing like a Castlevania setting-esque game, most of those rogues, most of the people in the Rogues Gallery, they're going to be necromancers, they're going to be undead, they're all going to have that sort of like gloomy atmosphere to them. And so they're going to set up that tone. Having a Rogues Gallery, like I had mentioned earlier with, I just found this green question mark, it's going to be a Riddler kind of adventure, you can provide these thematic adventures. Maybe your players have been going through like a lot of hack and slash and kind of a lot of bloody slogs, and you're worried that, you just want things to be a little bit more cerebral. So you're like, I know, I'm going to pull out my my Riddler style or my trickster style villain, and they're going to trap the heroes in a labyrinth with a series of puzzles to solve. And if they don't solve them, then something terrible happens. Or maybe if they do solve them, something good happens. Sometimes villains can do good things. So you can provide these thematic adventures. And like I said, once the recurring villain is recognizable, it's like, oh, it's, Captain Psychic, so now we're going to be doing like some sort of trippy mind game session. You can just use that, and already the players are on board. They're like, yeah, it's going to be that kind of a thing. We're going to roll right into it. And furthermore, Rogues Gallery provides consistency. It provides that kind of ongoing sense that the world keeps moving. The heroes are not the only ones who keep doing their day-to-day job. The villains also do it too. The villains have their goals, they're looking to do stuff, and they do that by recurring. They're not going to give up villainy just because the heroes happen to stop them once. Maybe after 3 or 4 times, maybe after a song or two. Something like that, but it provides that kind of consistency. So, moving into the ongoing campaigns, you're like, all right, Mike, we've got our nemesis, we've got our Rogues Gallery, I've got a bunch of ideas for recurring villains. How do we make this work as the campaign goes on? Well, your villains are going to start needing escape plans. This might sound super obvious, but sometimes as a GM, I actually forget to put in an escape plan. But many people who are putting their lives on their line to do something ridiculous like, I don't know, blow up City Hall or build a giant robot made out of pixie sticks. A lot of sugary robots in today's session. They're probably going to think, what if this doesn't work out as well as I'd hoped? Now, a lot of villains have megalomania, which means that they're not likely to think, what if this doesn't go as well as I'd hoped? But it's still worth remembering that even most megalomaniacs still recognize that they may need a plan B, whether it's an escape jet or maybe it's just some remembering the path to get out or remembering where the sewer lid is so they can make a hasty exit. And so that leads us to the idea that sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, which villains will remember, but heroes may need to encounter this as well. Sometimes heroes can lose. They can just straight up not stop the bad guy. Like, it's kind of disheartening when that happens. I mean, if you're playing a fairly gritty session, or if you're playing a session where you know there's going to be more going on, then the players can kind of take heart in knowing that they may have a chance to recoup from their losses. But but sometimes the reason a villain is recurring is because they won. And even if it's just in some small way. Sometimes City Hall gets blown up. Sometimes the heroes don't figure out the last puzzle in time. And then that leads you to the next adventure. Well, now how do we fix that? How do we deal with whatever happened? Yes, the dragon may have eliminated 60% of the town. 40% still there, which isn't bad, right? That block was already messed up. But then the question is like, well, then how do the heroes deal with that? How do the heroes deal with loss? Character development comes from victory, but it also comes from loss. Do the characters, do they buckle down and then defend that 40% of the town that's left? Do they just say, well, we didn't do it, and throw down their swords and quit and stop being recurring heroes? How do they deal with that? That can be very interesting. Do they decide to make it their own quest to avenge the fallen town against the dragon? Do they decide to, do they just say, heck with this place? It's like, well, that place went up like a tinder house. Maybe we'll have better luck at the next town. Kind of makes you wonder what happens when the 40% tell the other town what happened. Or Pyrrhic victories. Pyrrhic victories are ones where the heroes win, but did they really? It's kind of reminiscent of the meme or the screenshot from SpongeBob where it's like, we did it, Patrick, we saved the town, and there's nothing but ruin and flame behind them. So you might defeat the villain, but again, at what cost? And that is itself a great way to motivate heroes to do even more heroic things. Players will hopefully see that those opportunities in that light. You do have to be careful with things like the sometimes you lose and the Pyrrhic victories, because sometimes players can get very disheartened. It's like, oh, we tried our hardest, but then the villain still won. As a GM, you may need to give them a couple of minor victories or set up some easier challenges as they go on to kind of rebolster that confidence, especially I find with younger players. Or new players. New players are very easily disheartened if they don't beat the bad guy because they feel like they lost. But recurring villains, the whole point is the recurring. The heroes are also recurring. How do we keep moving? How do we keep going forward? You can also find yourself, once you've developed some recurring characters, you can get some really interesting team-ups going. I've used a lot of examples from popular media, but I'm going to use an example from my personal experience for this one. I should throw in more of those. But I had a superhero campaign going because why wouldn't I? And there was a character, he was a rhino character. He was just a big, hefty bruiser. His name was Jurassic Jack. He was a dinosaur man. That was his background. Dinosaur man. What else did you need? And the heroes would often fight him because he was a very popular kind of hitman bodyguard sort of a figure because he's a dinosaur man. Like, what else do you need? So bigger bads would hire him for smash and grabs or looting or whatever. Well, in the Christmas special, the town's power went out because a villain had decided to use the opportunity to freeze the power plant because he had ice powers and it was Christmas. And he was angry about something or other. He was holding the town for ransom, that's what it was. And so the heroes actually didn't know what was going on. They were like, why is the power out? What's going on? Is it this villain? Is it this villain? Is it this villain? It wasn't. It was a completely new villain. But they ran into Jurassic Jack and they were like, you're behind this. And he's like, why would I turn out the power? Like, no. I've been throwing cars around for an hour hoping you would show up. Or like, you didn't have to throw cars around. And he's like, well, I don't have your number. They were like, why did you want us? And he was like, because I know that there's a problem at the power plant and my parents need power because they're sick. Yeah. The table was silent. Like, this guy had shown up in at least half of the different episodes, and he mostly just shows up to punch things and break things, and he was a professional goon. He took his job very seriously, which meant that he didn't, talk a lot during the job, and he just mostly punched the things he was supposed to punch, which occasionally included trains. And that was his job. But this time, and he was like, my parents are sick, and they're on the power grid, and I need you to help me find out what's wrong because I don't want them to die. And the heroes were like, Where do you think we should start? And he was like, the power station. And we're like, that makes sense. We're detectives. And so they had this great team up, and the whole time, like, you know, because they had fought Jurassic Jack often enough that they knew his power set. They knew what he could do, and they knew what he couldn't do. And he knew their power sets. He knew what they could do and what he couldn't do. And so they did all kinds of things. They had a lot of the great team up things where, like, he grabbed the quick fast character and like threw the character over the fence to fight the goons. And there were other coordinated attacks, and it was a lot of fun. And at the end, he's like, "This doesn't change anything between us." And they were like, all right. And like one of the characters bought him a bottle of whiskey and like left it at his favorite hangout and was like, "Merry Christmas." And it was like, you know, it was very much the feel-good kind of Christmas session. But the only reason why that worked was because Jurassic Jack had shown up so many times and had an established personality. And even though his background had never been revealed, because they knew that he was that kind of a person, not just that kind of a character, but just that kind of a person, not just hyper strength and tough skin and armor and a preference for jazz and blues, because they knew what kind of approach he took to combat, what kind of an approach he took to even just being a goon. They were like, yeah, we can trust that this isn't a trick. There were other recurring villains where if they had said, "I need you to help me because my parents might die," they'd be like, "You don't have any parents because you're horrible." Come to think of it, there was I didn't really realize this, but at the early part of that particular campaign, there was a villain who got out of jail because he was visiting his dying mother, and so it was like a special trip out, and that ended badly for everyone but him. And he had just used it as an excuse, and he blasted his way out to freedom. In fact, I saw a few people shaking their heads as soon as it was like, you know, out of jail to visit someone. Oh, no. But they knew Jurassic Jack well enough. They were like, he's not lying. And even if he was lying, why would he use this lie? Other villains had recurred enough where even the most bizarre of lies would be seen as lies because they're just lying liars who lie. But it takes that recurring system, that takes that consistency of character. All right, running out of time. Is the constant problem with my daily life. So you can have team-ups. And of course, villains, much like heroes, they can retire. At the end of an arc, maybe they're just done. Maybe they're like, "You beat me. Like, that's it. You beat me. Like, I can't do it. I either have been beaten too much, I've lost too many resources, I no longer feel the desire to do to accomplish whatever that goal was." Maybe they finally do die. Maybe that is the thing. Maybe they are finally killed, or even if it's not the heroes killing them, maybe they're killed by their own goons, or they are hoisted by their own petard, fall into their own volcano on Main Street, whatever it is. And as they retire, that may just be the end of them. And then the next season starts with a new series of villains, a new villain. Or it may be that the villain decides to retire or is about to die or something, and then they pass the torch in some fashion. They either hand over their power armor or they give over their magic ring to the next person. They pass on that legacy. Sometimes the legacy gets passed on without their knowledge. Sometimes there's an up-and-coming villain who's been watching them and is like, I can't believe they gave up. I'm going to take their stuff and take their powers, or I'm going to emulate their powers, and I'm going to be the new whoever. I'm going to be the new, I guess it's hard to steal Venom's powers, or very easy to steal Venom's powers, depending on who you are. I'm going to take that element, I'm going to be the new Dr. Destroyo, or I'm going to be the new Dr. Von Kills-A-Lot. And so you can pass the torch. And so in the process of going through those arcs, in the process of villains retiring, or simply maybe they just finally get put in that supermax prison that they definitely can't get out of, you can use this as an opportunity to change your tone or even the focus of the game. You can change the tone from being, maybe it was a very gritty series, but now that all of those grittier villains have kind of met their ends, maybe it's the start for a lighter tone. Or vice versa. Maybe the lighter tone villains have been defeated, but that only means that now there's a power vacuum for those more cutthroat, more vicious villains to come in, and you can shift the game into something a little bit more cutthroat. or maybe you want to change the focus from the characters as specifically the player characters. Maybe you want to shift from the player characters to a different set of player characters or a smaller group of those player characters. By using the recurring villains and the ending of those villains, you can create kind of ends of chapters or ends of series, however you want to look at it. Which, I'm sorry, I thought there was another slide there. Although that's probably just as well because I'm about to run out of time. And so I would like to take this brief moment to say thank you very much for coming and hanging out with me. I have been and remain Captain Mike. Certainly, you can feel free to email me with any questions. I actually do have about 5 minutes for questions. I'm going to leave this up because even though there's only one remaining, it is at 8:30 p.m., which is putting the character back in non-player character. These are some of the other things I've been talking about. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. Oh, there is a question up back there. Oh, and I can be rated on the guidebook app, by the way. Yes.
How do you deal with the problem that I've had where I introduce this, here's a great villain, and it's built to be very threatening, and the players go, it's that guy, we got this, and then they just wobble. How do I build the threat of a villain if I hear my players aren't taking him as seriously as maybe I hope during playing?
So there are two ways to go with that. One, there is a certain value in a villain that can't be taken seriously, because that can be a lot of fun. But if you feel that that the villain's just being defeated too easily, well then the villain might, maybe the next time the villain shows up, however the heroes traditionally womp their opponents, doesn't work. So maybe it's that they found, hey, I found a magic shield that happens to block exactly the stuff you're going to use, or I have an anti-magic shell and all of your spells bounce off of me. Something to really just be like, oh, this person went from being the clown to a real threat. So that might help out. You know, bad guys do their homework too. Yes? Okay. He's afraid that he might have hyped up his villains too much. So there is, on a certain level, that would be kind of funny if they get into the end boss and it's like, all right, we are ready for this fight of our lives. And it's just a cardboard cutout. Or it's like three guys just in front of a bunch of computers. Actually, I did have a villain where the superheroes got in there and they were they had fought robots and everything, and they got to the villain himself, the mastermind, and the mastermind had 0 powers, was a 17-year-old kid, and just said, I surrender. They didn't know what to do. I'm sorry, the kid was 18 years old, because then afterwards, he had surrendered, and he was like, the heroes had no idea what to do. They were like, so do we fight? No, we can't fight. He surrendered. We have to take him to jail. If we fight him now, we're the bad guys. So he went to jail, and then he sued them. He had his robot bodyguard girlfriend become a robot bodyguard girlfriend lawyer and took them all to jail. He was trying to find out their secret identities. But yeah, they walked into that and it was a complete oof. So you can actually just run it that way. Alternately, if you're you do want it to be a big dramatic battle, just bump up those stats. Hey, sometimes people find magic swords just in the basement. They forgot they had it. Death rays, who doesn't have a death ray in their garage? But you can subtly bump those up when no one's looking, or just let them be what they are. You can also use that to show the heroes just how far they've come. They've now become so powerful that when they reach the big bad, it's no problem at all. Yes?
My characters in my D&D game often find they have more in common with the villains than they do with the townsfolk, and they can become friends with them. How do I make a recurring villain if my characters like all of my villains?
The older I get, the more I find Scar very, very reasonable. Yes, so the problem is that the heroes tend to relate better to the villains than to the local townsfolk. So this may actually be a more complex question than it seems on the tin. So it could be that is it because the heroes themselves are morally flexible enough that they find the villains to be very compelling, like they're basically borderline villains themselves? Or is it because the villains are just so cool?
A little of both. It's more like the party has no morality at all, and whatever doesn't bore them is what makes
Okay. Oh, in that case, that's easy. They're villains. I recommend your next group of villains being a group of paladins taking them to task. Remember, villains are really just antagonists, so you could have a group of paladins as quote-unquote villains, and it might be that, because you now have, I presume, a very powerful group of people who seem to be using power indiscriminately, or at least in a way that seems indiscriminate to others, you may have law and order types now becoming parts of their villain structure. And I mean, I'm assuming a lot about your campaign setting, and take what I say. Fair enough. So those could be pretty strong options. All right, I have just enough time for, I think, 2 more questions, and I see 2 more hands. Afterwards, I will still be available for chatting, but I don't want to hold up the next presenter. Yes? My villains attain victory fairly often. A major victory? Then they are changing the world. Be the change that you want to see in the world, as the great villain Gandhi once said. If that happens, like if the heroes just totally blow it and the villain totally gets away with it and I wasn't expecting it, that's just now a part of the setting. I can't undo that, nor would I, because I don't want, as much as I don't want to steal the victories for my heroes, I don't want to just hand them victories either. So now that major villain is now an even more villainous recurring villain, and maybe that changes the entire setting. Maybe that victory is what changes us from like a lighthearted romp to like a serious, gritty Castlevania, death world. I say let it fly and just see where it goes. Yes? 2 new ways to breathe new life into a recurve railing. Okay. One of them is a villain who decides that they're tired of being the type of villain that they were. Maybe it's just they were like a goofball villain and they want to be taken seriously, so they do something truly horrible, and even they don't know how to deal with it. And the other idea is, let's see, breathing new life. How villains react to success. Many villains don't know what to do with their goal once they've gotten it. In fact, I had mentioned Scar from The Lion King, and if you go back and watch the animated Lion King, you'll find that Scar wants to be king more than anything, but he has no idea what to do with it. Everything goes terribly, and he doesn't even care, because once he's king, he thinks he can just do whatever he wants, in reflection to Simba, who also thinks that and later learns that that is not the case. More of that reflecting business. But yeah, let them win, or let them have enough of a victory that they realize that what they wanted isn't what they wanted. And then they have to change their own goals, and they have to change as a character or fall apart, both of which can be very interesting, especially if things explode when they fall apart. So, all right. So thank you very much. Like I said, I will be hanging around for any additional questions. Enjoy the rest of your MAGFest. I will be putting the character back in non-player character at 8:30.